MFA Writers. I'm excited for you to hear this one because it is quite unique from our other episodes. The MFA program we're covering today, Iowa State, is focused on environmental writing, and our guest is a playwright, which I believe is a first on the show. I hope you find the conversation as fascinating as I did. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Taylor Sklenar, a playwright, poet, and theater artist pursuing his MFA in creative writing and the environment and MS in sustainable agriculture at Iowa State University. He received an MA in theater from the University of Missouri-Columbia, and his writing has been workshopped or produced at Tallgrass Theater's Iowa Playwrights Workshop, Stage West Des Moines Scriptease, Theater Cedar Rapids, and many other places. His most recent collaboration, Alice in Quarantine, a drive-through adventure, is published with Next State Press. Today he's brought 3 monologues to read from his current project, Decay Chain.
Thank you so much for having me. So, Decay Chain is a play that is centered on a fictional small town in northwestern Missouri that has recently decommissioned its coal-fired power plant and is sort of a struggling town. And the action of the play takes place when a nuclear startup comes to town and wants to renovate that old plant building into a state-of-the-art nuclear facility. And so I'll read 3 monologues, the first of which is by the character Danny, who used to work at the old coal plant called the Redford plant. You know that feeling when you go to the fair and you're on rides all day, and then you try to sit still, but you can still feel them? Or when you go swimming for too long, and then you lay in bed, and you can just feel the world moving around you like some sort of memory pushing back. I still feel the Redford plant when I lay down at night. I worked there 15 years. It doesn't go away easy. The rhythm of walking up all those flights of stairs sticks to your bones, comes off when you're still. I dream about taking apart valves, wake up with my fingers putting them back together. Sometimes when I'm still, I can feel the itch of the fiberglass insulation, smell the thick of smoke coming out of the towers. I hate being still. Gotta find some way to move. Something to replace those rhythms my damn bones won't forget. The next monologue is in the voice of a character named Mira, who is an 18-year-old girl who has just recently graduated from high school, and she's very, very bright and interested in everything that sort of has to do with the nuclear plant that they're building. I used to think a lot about how we're all just electricity. Electrons repel each other with such force that the electron clouds in 2 molecules can't pass through each other. The extreme force of it is the very reason we are corporeal. But recently, it occurred to me that I'm not just electrons. I'm protons, too. And these protons have that same force of repulsion, but they're packed so much tighter in the nuclei. And I'm just blown away by this idea that the very stuff that makes me up is just waiting to tear itself apart, to explode with the same force that makes us feel solid, that I have that kind of power inside of me. And the only thing holding it back is this slender, invisible piece of magic called the strong force. This strength that keeps us all from blowing apart. And the last monologue that I will share is in the voice of Rachel, who is a high school English teacher in town and becomes one of the people who is most adamantly opposed to the addition of this nuclear power plant in the community. You can't ignore the slow accumulation of tragedies when they collect in your bones. I have Chernobyl in my bloodstream, Fukushima eyes. When I think about fallout, they glow with rage, simmering wrath that traces all the way back to lymphocytes, invisible as neutrons, traces back to a cold day in a white room, and that phrase, can't know the cause. But there is no line to trace this rage back further. So here it metastasizes in what I can see, what I can run these bony fingers across. Thank you.
Taylor, that was awesome. Thank you so much for being here and bringing your theater skills to the podcast. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad to be here.
So what you do, writing for theater, it's fairly unique from my other guests. We were talking about this before we started recording. I think you're the first playwright I've had on the show. If not, I'm going to get some grief from someone. But I have the feeling that the subject you write about isn't particularly common in general, as your work mostly focuses on the environment and the intersection of science, communication, sustainability, and rural life. So I'm interested in just hearing your story. Where did you grow up? And when did you first get involved in theater?
Yeah, so I grew up in rural Iowa in a small town that was less than 1,000 people. I've been involved with theater really for my whole life, actually. One of my earliest memories, I was probably 5 years old, is doing Charlotte's Web, and I can still remember climbing up onto the platform upstage left and having on this costume with, fake legs hanging off of my two arms, and at the end of Charlotte's Web, waving my 8 limbs about. And that was sort of I think a formative experience. I did other theater shows as a youth, just at like a community theater. I remember auditioning for Music Man when I was probably 7 or so, and we were required to sing something. And instead of like singing a show tune or something, I sang All Star by Smash Mouth with my hands in my pockets the whole time, apparently. I got into the show, but I didn't get the part. So I've been involved with theater for really my whole life, and it's been something that's been a fun thing that I've done. I did speech competitions in high school and all of that stuff. But I grew up in a small town in southwestern Iowa called Trainer, and I moved there in 5th grade. So they didn't have a community theater like the town that we moved from, but I did do sort of speech in high school, and then when I moved to college, I continued to get pulled back into the theater more and more, even though I was pursuing STEM primarily.
Right. Like your background is in the sciences, specifically chemistry. So what drew you to this subject matter? And at what point did you start connecting your interests with like science and theater?
Yeah. So again, I've always had sort of an interest, as I'm reflecting, I guess I've always been sort of a polymath. I'm doing the arts and performing and a little bit of writing, but also I've had an interest in math and science for a long time as well, and really excelled at that. And when I went to college, I was planning on being an engineer. I enrolled at Iowa State as an engineer and stayed in that for about 3 days or something. And then I initially had interest in working at DARPA, which is sort of the research wing of the Defense Department. And they do some really like cool state of the art technology and innovation stuff. But it sort of dawned on me very quickly, like if I'm working for the Department of Defense, that's ultimately going to be helping kill people essentially, or, in defense of the country. And so I had some sort of moral conflictions about that and shifted into chemistry. I've always been interested in the way things work, and chemistry is sort of something that appealed to me because it allowed me to think about how are things working at the most fundamental level. It's the stuff that makes up everything. Everything can be broken down into its component parts. And so I really enjoyed that. And in particular, I really enjoyed organic chemistry, which is, I think, the one that many people loathe. But it was fun. It was like doing puzzles. It was very qualitative and less quantitative in the way that kind of chemistry works. And so I ended up, I worked in a research lab for a while and was doing organic synthesis. And it was about that time, which is probably my fourth year or so of a 5-year journey in undergraduate, when I was working in a research lab, and that I started to question, I've always been wanting to help the world, but what does that really look like? And how is it that I'm approaching that goal and making it something concrete? And I was always working in this research lab. I didn't feel like that was sort of lining up for me. I felt like there was a bigger picture that I was missing. And it was about that time that I took a playwriting class, actually, here at Iowa State, where I did my undergraduate. And I realized that I can combine these worlds that I've up until that point felt very separate to me. That I can write about science, I can write about the environment, I can write about all of this and do it so that it's to be performed on the stage, which is something I had been doing sort of all through undergraduate. Performing and writing as separate things, and so it was this monumental moment of seeing my writing, my theater, my acting, my directing, and this chemistry and the sciences that I've been doing can all sort of play nice together. And in fact, one of the number one things that I think, as we're thinking about climate change, needs to happen is social change. It's a social problem as much as it is a technical problem. And so being able to use theater as a tool to reach people, to look at big systems level problems and say, look, there's a face here, and look, it's we as people who have to change and to do something about it. That felt like a purpose that made sense. And that felt like something I wanted to drive towards, and that could bring all of these things together. So that was sort of how I landed in all of these disparate fields together. And, growing up in the rural Midwest in a little town in Iowa, I was surrounded by corn and agriculture. And I didn't grow up on a farm. I was technically a town boy, but most of the people in my high school class were all farmers or farm adjacent, and so it's a world that I sort of grew up adjacent to. And then as I was thinking more and more about the environment and about the context that I was raised in, and the world that I'm still in now in Iowa, it naturally led me to thinking about our food system and thinking about how agriculture can be more sustainable, and what are the stories in these rural communities that, like the one that I grew up in, that need to be told.
Well, as you mentioned, you have all these various interests. And you have various degrees. You have a bachelor's degree in chemistry, a bachelor's in English, one in performing arts, all from ISU. You have an MA in theater from the University of Missouri-Columbia. And you're currently getting an MFA in creative writing and the environment, and an MS in sustainable agriculture from Iowa State. So I'm like running out of fingers here. Do we need to stage an intervention, man? What's going on here? I've gotten that a lot. I'm gonna walk into a room one day and they're gonna say, we need to talk about the papers on the wall. No, I'm kidding, of course. But I am curious. You clearly love academia. So what is it that keeps you coming back for more?
I love to learn. That's always for my whole life. I've been a sponge, really trying to soak up so much of the world around me and to better understand everything that's going on. So I think, again, that's one of the things that led me to chemistry, was it felt like this really fundamental thing that I wanted to understand about the world. How do things work at the fundamental particle level? But as I started to sort of, think about the bigger picture, I realized that that's not the whole picture, that there's this whole other world, this sort of systems level interworkings that I wanted to understand better. And so I've been in academia for, even just, college for a decade now. And I just love to learn and to know as much about the world around me as possible, I guess.
Do you think growing up in like a small town affected that at all? Do you think that made you more curious in some way? Because I grew up in what sounds like a very similar situation that you did, like small town. I wasn't a farmer per se, but like grew up around everyone I knew, and a lot of people in my family were. Not a ton of resources in my town, like not a ton of opportunities. Like I'm not sure if I wanted to pursue theater, if it would have been available to me. So like, I think that may have fostered like some kind of individualistic curiosity on my part, where it was like, if I was interested in something, I would just like go figure it out on my own. You think that had any effect on you?
I definitely think that the town that I grew up in had a big impact on that. And I would spend a lot of time also just like, reading or studying. That's something that I've always enjoyed. And I think that living in a small town did sort of encourage me to do that more. There's not as much to do unless you drive into the city or something. And so I think it made me maybe a little bit more insular in some ways, or it helped me kind of fuel that desire to kind of look within and to dig into books and to dig into myself. And at the same time, I know that in the particular city or town really that I grew up in, there was a big emphasis on really working hard. The motto, I kind of I chuckle about it now, but the motto of our high school was "Excellence is expected and excellence is achieved." So it was this very small, hyper performing town, high school in the town, and I think that put in me a drive to continue. And all things, really doing my best, and anytime I'm studying or trying to learn, I really embrace that and go hard. And I think that's part of how I ended up, doing three majors in undergraduate, and multiple master's degrees. And as I'm getting excited about these things, I'm really embracing them. And I feel like my parents were also a heavy influence in that respect as well, always encouraging me to they recognized that I was good at math, I was good at science, I was good at writing and performing and all of these things, and really encouraged me to buckle down and really go at it hard, embrace all of that. And I think that all of that kind of came together, and it's part of the reason that I've spent so much time just studying, learning, and really in academia.
Well, let's talk about writing process a little bit. So how does a new project usually start for you? Do you have an idea for a character or story first, and then the environmental issues find their way in? Or do you often have an environmental issue in mind that you build a story around?
It can go either way, really. It's hard to say that there's one way that ideas strike me. Because sometimes it is just a small little detail, somebody I meet and I maybe don't know, but I'm like, oh, that's a real character. That person has a place in a play somewhere. Wow, that way that person talked, or even once the way that person smelled, I'm like, okay, this person maybe owns rabbits, and now I'm fascinated and I want to like write this into a play. And so there is, there's that route where sometimes it's just small details, and I'm sure like many writers, I carry around a little notebook for details and story ideas and those little disparate bits that find their way into stories. But other times, it starts at the macro level. It is, look, this is a story, or this is a problem that I want to tell, I want to address. And it's really then fleshing out, okay, who are the players? Who are the stakeholders in this problem, in this community? That's more so how Decay Chain came about, that I was thinking about the complexity of the balance of when you have climate change and we need carbon-free energy, but we also know that we have this nuclear power, which is virtually carbon free, but comes with a whole host of other environmental justice problems. And so that was sort of a macro level problem. I was thinking about the tension between those two worlds, and also thinking about how that comes to life in rural communities, and how rural communities themselves are sort of struggling and needing to benefit from these things, but then also at times at prey for corporations that are coming in. And so, at times it can be more like the bits and details that lead to things. But a lot of times for longer projects, it seems to be it's coming more from looking at macro level problems and trying to really put a face to those problems and boil down the details from the macro.
I've never written a stage play before. I've done a little bit of screenwriting. Like, do you usually have like kind of an outline of the whole story that you work on first? Or I don't know, like, what are the steps in your process?
Yeah, I think I am a big outliner, I will say. And I think that there are a lot of similarities between playwriting and screenwriting. Obviously, there are differences in terms of you don't have a lens when you're writing for the theater, and there are other forms of sort of theatricality that you can write in. But in terms of plotting, I find them very similar. I use the note cards technique a lot of times. So writing down, okay, here's a scene that I think needs to happen, or here are the main beats, and that gives some flexibility to kind of shuffle them around and see, especially if it's not exactly a linear story, then you can play with what's happening when, and kind of have the flexibility to shift them around. But yeah, I'm somebody who typically relies on an outline, and if I don't have at least that skeletal structure, I can feel sort of lost. I do occasionally write like that, a little bit more freewheeling, and that can be nice if I'm starting to feel sort of blocked up. I just start writing, and I don't know if this is even going to be in the play or the screenplay. It's just going to be something that I'm writing to play around, and sometimes it does end up, and sometimes it doesn't end up in the script. So.
Well, you say your work tends to float between very weird, poetic, stylized stories and more grounded or accessible stories. So at what point in the process do you know it's going one way or the other?
It's usually pretty early, I would say. And occasionally I'll write something fairly realistic and then go, okay, now I want to weird it up. Or, I'll try to mess around and make it more exciting, or incorporate that theater magic. One of my mentors at University of Missouri Columbia, David Crespi, one of his primary approaches to playwriting and screenwriting is dream work. So I learned a lot from him and was really excited to work with him when I went there, because he really uses all kinds of different techniques, be it sort of surrealism, modernism, like all kinds of different techniques to sort of break up just a straightforward linear play. And yeah, he was a huge influence on me, and I think I got a lot out of that. And so I feel like I think a lot in terms of dreams now. How can things be dreamlike and their qualities? One that was perhaps on the stranger end was a play I wrote that was a one-act play called Fission. And it was actually expanded from a very short spoken word poem that I had written. And I took sort of the core idea of that poem and wanted to actually make it a story, and something that is a little bit longer. The inspiration for it, or the impulse for writing it at that time was about 2017. And it was when tensions with North Korea got really, really high. And we were like, the Union of Concerned Scientists actually moved the clock, the doomsday clock, up to 2 minutes for the first time since like the Cold War. And so I took this poem and expanded it into a play that took place in a timeless city stretching sea to sea. And it was frozen at 2 minutes until midnight, and sort of the sets and props and everything were suspended, midair was the idea. And the language that I used in that play, each character spoke in a very different sort of poetic style or a different form of speaking. Some were more, there was a homeless prophet who spoke in almost like E.E. Cummings style, broken bits and fragments and parentheticals and things. And then the more polished philanthropist spoke in like iambic pentameter, and everything was very measured. And so that's something that I sometimes have fun doing, is finding ways in which dialogue and poetry can be sort of merged, not to sound too pretentious, but kind of in the way that Shakespeare was doing way back in the day, where the very way that people speak, not just what they're saying or not just, how the dialogue is functioning, but the very like poetry of how people are speaking can communicate things about who they are, about status and class and all of that sort of thing. And so that's something that I also enjoy playing with, is, I say that some of my scripts are poetic. How can verse and prose and all of these different forms of writing help inform who the characters are and what the story I'm telling is?
I was actually living in South Korea when that was happening.
Oh my gosh.
And if you'd have told me growing up in Montgomery City, Missouri, that one day I'd be on my computer checking the nuclear fallout distance from, particular targets near where I was living, I don't think I would have believed you. But yeah, that was a wild time and something worth writing about. I can't imagine putting it on the stage, though. I mean, that sounds really cool. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Well, and the flip side of that, too, is if you write very weird and strange and these sort of like surreal scripts, it can also be sort of isolating for some people, especially if you have audience members who have never stepped foot in a theater, who don't come very often. To have something very avant-garde can be distancing. So that's why I say that I sort of, I write between these styles, and I write in a lot of different styles, because especially as I'm thinking more about plays like Decay Chain that I hope might even be, packed up into a truck and toured around rural Iowa. I'm trying to write scripts that are also very accessible and that are, people can feel like they can really connect to without going, oh my God, I have no idea what just happened. I've seen my fair share of plays and certainly written some that are a little bit like that.
I was curious about that because there are so many facets to actually staging a play. It's not like writing a story where I'm free to do pretty much whatever the hell I want. So what kinds of considerations do you have to make when deciding whether to stick to its traditional structure or push the boundary a bit?
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that go into creating a script. It also sometimes depends on how producible I'm trying to write. Sometimes I throw that all out the window and say, I'm just going to write whatever I want, and the director will have to figure it out or else they won't produce it. But one of the things that I think is often overlooked is number of characters. A lot of young writers have the impulse to just write in every single character that might be needed. Here's the waiter, and here's the maitre d', and here's all of these, one person who floats by and says one thing. But every time that you write another character into your play, that's another actor who's in the rehearsal process. That's another actor who's going to get paid by the production company. That's another. So I try to really write tight in terms of how many characters that I'm putting on stage. That also just leaves more space for each character to get developed more fully. If you have fewer characters, it allows you to spend more time with them. And sometimes, this goes both in terms of realistic plays and stranger plays, that I just want to make sure that every actor that is on stage has something to do and feels like they're really getting something valuable out of that rehearsal process. So even if it's not a straightforward play, I might give them 3 or 4 different strange roles or something that they're coming in and doing. I think also there's some very basic considerations, like, if somebody's gonna go off stage and then come back on stage at the very beginning of the next scene in a totally different outfit, that's a quick change you got to write in, and how much time, what does that change look like if, it's a very different costume and they're the last person on stage in one scene, the first person on stage in another. You're sort of writing an impossible task in for some costume designer. And sometimes impossible tasks are fun, and I think that there's a time and a place to embrace them. But if I'm trying to write more producible, I try to think about all of those different elements of the production and make it easier on the director for things like that, so that they can focus on the more fun things that they want to put their energy towards in the script.
Right. I mean, theater it's such an incredibly collaborative, interdisciplinary art with visual designers, textile designers, actors, directors, writers. So at what point in the process do you involve these various collaborators? Like, are you getting feedback early in the writing process from some of these people?
Not typically in like a formal way. It can kind of depend. A lot of times what the development process looks like for a play is, you write it, you write the best draft that you can, and then sometimes you just sit around a table and read it with your actor friends. You buy a pizza and invite your actor friends over, and you just do a basic table read to hear it out loud. The step after that is a more polished reading, a staged reading, and those will more often be for a general audience. And so it's possible that you have some people with experience in set design or costume design or lighting, any of that sort of in the audience, and you might get some feedback in that way. Or you can always take it to your lighting friends, your set design friends, and say, hey, how would you do the set for this? Like, what do you think about this? Is this too impossible? But it's usually there are those steps of sort of reading and staged reading before you get into mounting a full production. And a lot of times that's a necessary process to sort of shape it and hone it before people will want to go, oh yeah, this is something really polished that I'm going to spend the time and resources to produce.
Well, now you're in the MFA program at Iowa State, which is officially called an MFA in Creative Writing and Environment. It's a 3-year program with tracks in poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and drama. According to the website, the program encourages writers to identify and explore the complex influences of place, the natural world, and the environmental imagination. Before Iowa State, you got your MA in theater from the University of Missouri-Columbia, my alma mater, by the way. I imagine there at Mizzou, you were working with a lot of theater people who may or may not have been writing about the environment, while now you're around a bunch of environmental writers who may or may not be writing for theater. So how have the two experiences been different for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Doing the MA in theater, I was surrounded by theater people who are familiar with the stage and who know what plays look like, at least, and fewer people who are really engaged with the environment. And so it's funny, sort of any time that climate change or the environment or anything like that was mentioned, heads would turn towards me. And now I'm in this MFA program where everybody's dealing in some way with, the environment or place or, thinking really heavily about climate change. And very few of them have sort of a primary focus in playwriting. And so anytime that theater or plays are mentioned, all heads turn towards me now. So it's been sort of an inversion. But I think that the two have then reinforced each other really, really well in terms of what I'm getting out of those programs. I think that I've learned so much from both of these programs, but in what feels like, in inverted fields or inverted ways.
What about working with environmental poets and prose writers, or just poets and prose writers in general? Like, what have you learned about your own process and your own writing from just working closely with people who are writing, but writing different things, different genres?
That's a really good question. It's always great to have sort of like that outside perspective from people that maybe aren't familiar with theater, and it's valuable because theater too, like when you do a play, you don't expect that everyone in the audience is going to like be a playwright. And so it's always great to have just sort of a really broad set of perspectives. And each of the people in my cohort or each of the people that I've worked with in the workshop setting just brings so much knowledge from their own field of experience, from poetry, thinking about how can you tighten this down? How can you really hone your dialogue, or from prose as well, thinking about structures and big ideas and things that I maybe at times hadn't even seen in my own work. And also I think, all of the people that I'm working with have different levels of, or different areas of expertise in sort of this environmental writing and this environmental thinking. And so I feel like I've been exposed to just a lot of different theorists and scholars and writers that are working at this intersection. So I'm constantly dazzled by the brilliance of the people in this program. And I feel like I've gotten a lot out of working with all of them.
How many other playwrights are in the program at the same time as you?
I might be the only one who's like primarily a playwright. I know that there are other people who do playwriting or who do like spoken word, like performance poetry or screenwriting. But it's generally a minority in this program. I think we tend to have more poets and more prose writers.
As you said, I'm sure you're like learning a ton from these poets and prose writers, but it might also be, I assume, kind of tough sometimes to be the only playwright. Like, do you feel like you're getting like the feedback that you need from the workshops if people don't have that background in theater to maybe totally understand what you're doing?
That's another great question. And I feel like I feel like I am, not necessarily from everyone. Again, it's sort of like a lot of people recognize this is not really my area of expertise. And so I get valuable feedback from them still, but, there are other people in the program who are playwrights and who have written and produced plays and all of that. I'm not totally isolated in that respect, but, I just, it's a different perspective. It's a different kind of looking at something with the eyes of sort of like a prose writer or a poet. And I wouldn't have come back to Iowa State if I wasn't very excited about, the faculty here and felt like I was going to get a lot out of it. So I feel like it's been a really valuable experience and really enriching.
And you have a lot of experience at this point. So it's not like you're coming in like total novice. It's at playwriting and like you really need like some basic help. Like you've been doing it for a while. I mean, while you were at Mizzou, you served as the managing director of the Missouri Playwrights Workshop and the Mizzou New Play Series. So what were those experiences like, and how do you think they prepared you for the MFA?
Yeah, so what those look like is the Missouri Playwrights Workshop was a weekly get together where a playwright brings in a script and we cast it right there and do just like a cold reading, and that allows the playwright to get that really valuable get to hear their work out loud, get that experience, and then get a little bit of feedback as well from the people that are participating in that. And then the Mizzou New Play Series is that next sort of step that I was describing earlier of having a more polished staged reading. That's something that happens once a year, and it's a whole week of different scripts that have been rehearsed and staged, still sort of script in hand, with minimal sets or props or anything. But it's a chance to really see a script moving in space, and then again to get more feedback from the audience after taking it sort of to that next step. And those were both incredibly valuable experiences. And I came to Mizzou having done some, sort of started my own collective where we were doing these staged readings. It's one of the most valuable things for a playwright is just having the chance to hear your work out loud, because that's something that you can't do just sitting in your office on your computer alone. You can try, but it's really something that exists in time and in space and in multiple voices and bodies. And so being able to have a lot of experience working with actors and working with that developmental process, I think it was really invaluable. I think in particular, doing a lot of talkbacks and learning what sort of feedback is valuable. How do I navigate running a talkback? How do I make sure that we're doing this in a way that is helpful to the playwright and that they're not getting bombarded with just ideas that the audience wants to sort of throw out there and prescribe. And, the audience is a really valuable part of that process, but you have to have kind of that intermediary. A lot of times it's a dramaturg who does that. So I feel like I got a lot of that dramaturgy sort of experience from working in those talkbacks. And it made me better about navigating how I take in feedback. So we were talking about being one of the few playwrights in this program and getting feedback from lots of different perspectives. I think that was something that was really valuable to help sort of sift through and think about where this different kind of feedback is coming from, and be able to really digest that into something that's valuable, having done those talkbacks before and run them for other people.
Well, in Ames, you founded the theater collective EcoTheatre Lab. Tell us about that project.
Yeah, that was the project that I alluded to just a minute ago. So at the time, I had just graduated from undergraduate, and I was sort of looking around, and in Ames, which is not a huge city, it didn't seem like there was a lot of opportunities for new play development and for doing that sort of staged reading work. And so that was a hole that I really wanted to try to fill in the community. And so I started doing these monthly readings where people could bring in their scripts. And it started just like at a bar. There was a bar that I kind of knew the manager, and there was like a stage in the corner that wasn't being used on Wednesday nights or something to that effect. And so we were allowed to use this space, and we'd do a couple of rehearsals and polish up some readings. And again, it would give the playwrights the opportunity to hear their work out loud, and to get a little bit of feedback from audience and from the artists that were involved. And from there, it sort of continued to grow. We did a few different productions and things, and we got more in sort of that side of things that, once scripts felt really polished, we would sometimes do a production of full-length script or a one-act script within sort of, shoestring budgets and stuff, within certain limitations. And that's something we've gone dormant during the pandemic a little bit. We've been just sort of, as a really small group, trying to kind of keep our eye on how that's evolving, and are just now talks about what that's going to look like as we open back up. But that was sort of the impulse for how we started EcoTheatre Lab.
Well, Iowa State seems to have a ton of unique opportunities available to students. So I want to give you some time to tell us a bit about each. We'll just do a kind of rapid fire thing here or something. But let's start with the Flyway Journal of Writing and Environment, of which you were the poetry and drama editor.
Yeah, so Flyway is an international online journal of the environment. So all of the submissions that we get are environmental in some way, or should be environmental in some way. And we define the environment very broadly in the MFA in creative writing and environment. So sometimes that is, very literally, trees and parks and what we think of as environment, but it can also be urban environment. It's really just thinking about place, and place's relationship to human beings. So this journal is looking at environmental writing, and we take submissions of pretty much all genres. I came in and said, hey, we don't have drama accounted for in this. So we did sort of a run of drama, and I took that on for the first time, and we did a call and published 3 short plays that were environmental. And it's run by the students in the MFA program, along with some faculty oversight as well. But it's primarily all the graduate students. So that's an opportunity to get some editing experience and work on a really cool journal.
And you also served as the coordinator of the Emerging Writers Reading Series?
Yeah, that's correct, with one other person who was a coordinator, Emily Riley. And that's a monthly reading series where students in the MFA program get the chance to kind of get together and get together also with the broader community and to share work outside of the workshop process. We don't always get the opportunity to do that. And so we helped coordinate and run that for this year, and also started doing some things that were more like open mic nights, some more casual get-togethers and that sort of thing, to just sort of share our work as a community of writers.
Yeah, those kinds of things are nice too for building community, I imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have a new indie bookstore that opened up just like a year or two ago. And so we talked with them, and that's where we did it all year. Shout out Dog-Eared Books in Ames, Iowa. And they were fantastic. And I think everybody really enjoyed just getting to hear people's work, because you don't always, a lot of times you're limited to who are the people that are in this workshop class with me. That's the people's work who I'm going to hear. And so it was really a great opportunity. We heard from the large majority of the people in the MFA program across all of the cohorts and everything this year.
And you're a core member of the EcoTheatre Lab. What's the EcoTheatre Lab?
The EcoTheatre Lab is a project that's run by Dr. Carissa Menifee, who's the faculty who primarily does playwriting here at the MFA in Creative Writing and Environment. And it focuses on telling stories of social and environmental justice in our community. We do a lot of sort of pop-up events and small theater actions, that sort of thing. One of the projects that we participated in the most has been Climate Change Theater Action, which is it happens every 2 years. Internationally, it's run by someone named Chantal Bilodeau, and every 2 years to sort of correspond with the IPCC's working group. Then it's play readings that are paired with actions for climate. And so we basically organized a whole sustainability resource fair, did a whole production, and it's happened in 2021, 2019, 2017. And the EcoTheatre Lab is sort of the core group of artists who are doing that work. We also got a small grant this year, and have been touring around art pieces, both like things like puppets and performance stuff, as well as visual stuff, all around Ames, and then providing information about our Ames Climate Action Plan, which is in the process of being put together. And so we've given information for things like surveys, so you can give information, the community can give information to the city council that's doing the planning. And I can't say as a result exactly of that process, but certainly part of this is then recently they set a target of, I think, 83% reduction of carbon outputs by 2030, which is very, very ambitious. And a lot of the reason for that was the community input that they were getting. So anyway, so a lot of really great sort of theater action and interdisciplinary arts projects that the EcoTheatre Lab is heading up, thinking about how can we get out in the community and use arts to really think about climate change and the environment.
Students in the program also have access to the Everett Casey Nature Reserve, which the program owns and maintains. This sounds pretty unique. So. Yeah, this is pretty dope.
So I'm not sure if it's exactly the program or the English department who owns it, but it's pretty much the program that maintains it. We have stewards of this nature reserve who do things like trail management and that sort of thing, and it's literally it's maybe 20 or 30 miles outside of Ames. It's easily drivable, and you can go and walk through the woods. There's spots where you can do campfires. People camp out there, or we'll do get-togethers. There's all kinds of hiking trails and a little stream that runs through there, so you can bring people will bring their dogs and have them run around. There's also there's an apiary, so you can a couple times a year watch the beekeeper doing his thing with the bees, and you get some honey out of it. So it's a really very interesting and really fun feature that's been another community building point for the MFA program. And a lot of people go and hang out there and do different get-togethers and things, or go out and camp, and lots of fun stuff happens out there.
Cool. And lastly, I want to hear about the writers' retreats to Lakeside Lab at Lake Okoboji and the Land Institute that you say have helped build community in the program.
Yeah, so typically once a year, and it's generally at the beginning of the fall semester when the new cohort is coming in. There are usually trips that the new cohort, and in recent years it's been the whole program, go on. And in past years it was to the Land Institute, which is in Salina, Kansas, and has the Land Institute does research in perennial grain crops and just sustainable food systems and a whole myriad of other things. And they hold a prairie festival is what it's called. And the new cohort will go out. In past years, it's been to the Prairie Festival at the Land Institute. But in more recent years, it's been to Lake Okoboji, to Lakeside Lab, it's called, where they have different research labs that are on the lake that study everything from ornithology, ichthyology, to I think that they have one of the most state-of-the-art diatom labs. So all of these like different ecological niches and studies, they have all kinds of really cool resources out there. And our program will go and visit Lakeside Lab for a few days and have a mini writers retreat. So we all sort of stay in cabins, and it's you can wander the trails and the prairie and through the oak savanna and on the lake, and just sort of soak in the world around you. And I think a lot of people have found that really valuable, both for just sort of like taking a breath in that first semester, and like, you know, some people spend it as like a writing retreat to really like, I'm going to get as much writing as I can. Some people just take a breath, you know, and for some people it's really it's a little of both. And it's also a really great opportunity to just build community. And in my first semester, it was basically within the first couple of weeks, they threw us all in one big van and drove us to Lake Okoboji. And there's nothing that I think pulls people together like throwing you all in a big van and you know, being in that confined space for 3 hours. But then it's also just, yeah, it's fantastic to just be in that space, be on the lake. It's just gorgeous. And there's so much life that's happening around you that I feel like a lot of people have found that really enriching also for building community, for getting to know the other people in the program.
Yeah, all of those sound really cool and really unique. And, you know, I mean, it's a unique program in general. I don't know that there's any other program in the country that's focused on the environment the way ISU is. So it's cool that they're just like bringing in these outside resources and trying to integrate them into the program. I mean, you're doing a second degree while you're getting the MFA. I think it's in sustainable agriculture. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, it's an MS.
I imagine you're kind of doing that same thing on your own, bringing in outside resources that you have from this other program into your MFA experience.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm pursuing a MS in sustainable agriculture along with my MFA, and I find the two really well wedded together. That I find it really enriching just to better deepen my understanding of the food system around me. I talked about growing up in Iowa, but feeling sort of adjacent to the actual, you know, process of farming, and I feel like I've learned a lot about what our food system actually looks like. You know, we're in Iowa, surrounded by fields and fields, you know, thousands and thousands of acres of corn, and none of it's eaten by humans, which a lot of people don't realize. And one of the great things about the sustainable agriculture program is that it's also incredibly interdisciplinary. We have people in that program that are agronomists who are, doing a PhD and know everything there is to know about soil science. We have, ecologists. We have people in like natural resource management, people as well as people in sociology and nutrition, and even, the artists like myself. And my partner is also in that program, and integrating the arts in with sustainable food systems. So it's an eclectic bunch, but it's a group of people who really embrace the interdisciplinary. And I found that the overlap between these two programs has been really enriching.
Well, I want to talk about a few nuts and bolts things related to the MFA program that might be of interest or concern to applicants. One being funding. According to the website, ISU makes every effort to offer assistantship support to all the students admitted to the MFA program. I read that and I think they're like leaving the door open to maybe not funding every student. So in your time, have all the students been funded?
Yeah, to my knowledge, everybody has been funded. And in fact, so typically what it looks like is you'll get an assistantship teaching like first year composition, freshman composition. I assume that's pretty common for MFA programs. Some people will teach in speech communication. A few people, I ended up shifting over to a position in sustainable agriculture and TAing a class in SusAg. There's also some competitive like fellowship. So I was a HOGRIF fellow in my first year. So that was covered with without needing to teach. And I think that they typically offer 1 to 3 HOGRIF fellowships per year. So not only is it funded, but some people may, will be able to have that fellowship in their first year and not have to teach, which is really great. You get more time to spend writing.
Yeah, right. And if you are teaching, what's the workload? How many classes are you teaching a semester?
2. It's typically 2 classes is the way it breaks down.
And what's the stipend?
Oh, that's a good question. It's around 18 or 19 a year off the top of my head.
Does that feel like a good amount living in Ames? You feel pretty comfortable?
Oh, yeah. Ames is a great town. It's, especially if you're comparing this to towns on the coasts, Ames is very, very affordable. And it's also just a fantastic town. I think it's consistently rated in the top 2 or 3 best university towns, like in the nation or in the world. Like it's a fantastic town to live in. And yeah, we're in the middle of Iowa, but it's very much like a blue dot that's tapped into larger cultural things happening and lots of opportunities for artists and thinking about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion and some of these things that at times it feels like the rest of the state isn't necessarily.
I'm also curious to hear about the field experience component of your MFA program that each student has to complete as part of the coursework. That also seems like a fairly unique thing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as part of the environmental part of the coursework, students spend three credit hours doing some sort of field experience. And that can be, again, sort of defined broadly, with the intention being that it will help serve your thesis. And so there are people who have gone and done who have gone and worked at Los Alamos where they developed the nuclear bomb, or who have gone out to Montana and spent time sort of like in the woods out in Montana working with natural resource management. It looked also a little bit differently during the pandemic as travel became trickier. So for mine, I stayed a little bit more local and I worked at a sustainable garden in town. But it's an opportunity to get credits going out into the world, doing something that's hands-on, that's going to get you experience that you need to help inform your work or inform your professional practice. It seems that sometimes people will even use like editing experience or something like that, like going and working for as an editor with a publisher, that sort of thing. That can also kind of flex as a field experience. But a lot of people go sort of out into the environment itself, and it really helps reinforce in a hands-on, tangible way the work that you're doing.
Well, the program sounds unique. Your experience sounds cool. I loved hearing about like your writing process, especially related to theater, because it's something that I've never really thought of. But I can't imagine like sitting down to write a story and having to think about costume changes and number of actors and all that. So kudos to you. It sounds complicated, but also really fascinating, and I'm sure really fun. So thank you for sharing that stuff. Before we go, I want to know what's one thing that you think the program does really well, and one thing that you think they could improve on.
I think, from my experience, at least, one of the things I loved the most about this program was the sense of community. Obviously, I've been in a lot of programs in in the last decade, my time in academia, and I think that this, of all of them, is the one that I have felt most enmeshed in this community and closely tied to the people in the program. And so the community building in this program is really remarkable. In terms of any sort of like, I guess, critique or something I would have of the program, I do think, this is probably true in lots of MFA programs though, but like just trying to balance the teaching load with actually having time to write. You come in sometimes thinking, oh, okay, I'm in an MFA program, I'm going to do nothing but write. And then you realize, okay, I've got to spend, I'm teaching 2 classes, I've got to spend 20 hours a week working on that teaching. And so that I think can be a balance. And as I said, some people have found jobs that aren't just like, teaching English comp. They might work in women and gender studies, or I worked with SASAG, and there are other, you can kind of find other assistantships if you put in that legwork. So if you don't like, if you don't like to teach comp, that's maybe an option, but it is, no matter what you're doing, there's going to be time that goes into kind of figuring that out, and that goes into the teaching itself, or whatever that assistantship is. And that's, I think, a tricky balance that a lot of people have felt.
Yeah, I think teaching workload is definitely something applicants should be considering when they're applying to programs, because my program was also a 2-2 workload, so teaching 2 classes per semester, and it can be a lot, teaching 2. It does take away from your writing time a bit. So definitely a consideration. Some programs, you're just teaching 1 class a semester. Sometimes it's 1 in the fall, 2 in the spring, something like that. But it's cool that at Iowa State, they at least have these fellowships that are an option. So that's something to keep in mind for people applying.
I would also add, I just remembered, so as of like the last semester, they've been working to add some other opportunities for assistantships, like helping do trail maintenance at the Nature Reserve, like helping host emerging writers. So there are some options that are kind of bubbling up, and that are, I think, going to be in place as of next year, in terms of some other things to help take off workload in terms of teaching and stuff.
So things to keep in mind and things to ask the program about if you were to get in. So Taylor, thanks so much again. This has been great.
It was a pleasure.